Okay, folks, good evening, everybody. We will make a start as we've got quite a full agenda this evening. Just to remind everybody at the outset that the meetings of the executive, as with all council meetings, are now webcast. Clearly, therefore, I just remind everybody, if possible, to make sure that you use the microphones when you are speaking. And if anybody at the back is called to speak, if you could move forward to make sure that you are using the microphones. But also of equal importance is to remember to turn off the microphones, because as interesting as it is, I'm sure nobody at home wants to know what we're all having for dinner. So just another change from previous meetings is the provision to receive questions from members of the public. So we do have those for the first time this evening. Before we do that, just to note attendances, I'm not aware of any apologies this evening. No, okay, great. Okay, we're on to questions from members of the public. We have received 8 questions from Ms. Potts on behalf of the Friends of Cowfield. Just to remind everybody that as per the rules of the Constitution, we have up to 15 minutes to hear the questions. They all relate to one specific area of the agenda tonight with regards to proposed development opportunities. So they will all be answered by Councillor James Wright, who is the Executive Member for Investment, Regeneration and Strategic Planning. Just to say, there is no provision within the Constitution for supplementary questions, so we will make sure that we keep to 15 minutes, but all questions do need to have been submitted in advance. Just before the start, James, if it's helpful just to say that I did speak to Ms. Potts beforehand. I think we very much view this as the start of a conversation with this. This is very much at an early stage, so if you do feel that a further discussion is required at a later date with regards to any of this, that's something we'd very much be happy to do. Okay, so I make it 18:32 on my clock, so we've got 15 minutes. If you'd like to put the first of your questions.
The first question, will the council commit to full community engagement and consultation across Oldfield Brow before the outlined development plans are finalised? And can they advise what geographical area and stakeholder groups this will cover?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, full public consultation will be undertaken with residents and stakeholders before plans are finalised. Thank you.
In any final development, can the committee advise how much funding will be made available to mitigate for loss of community green space and commit to this being directly spent in Oldfield Brow, in particular improvement on enhancing informal leisure facilities in Cowfield?
Thank you. Yeah, the proposals are not at an advanced enough stage for the planning service to be able to determine whether mitigation for loss of green space will be required, and if so, whether a financial contribution is the most appropriate way of providing mitigation and where money should be directed. This will be a matter for the local planning authority and will be a decision which will need to be made on planning grounds having regards to the specific merits of the proposal and relevant legislation and policy.
Can you please furnish us with further details on what the additional community asset is mentioned in the report, section 2, paragraph 2, given that Siemens Moss Community Association was the development partner for a community centre in 2014, but have since stated they no longer wish to fund a centre?
Thank you. It is considered the proposed new home for the rowing club will be an additional community asset, as the building will provide use and benefit beyond its own users.
Can you advise why management of the land by Friends of Cowfield has not been included as an other option in section 4.0?
All possible options will be considered, though the council considers that it is unlikely that maintaining the current or similar use will generate a sufficient financial return or maximise the potential regeneration benefits. The council is aware of both the FIO request and registration of community value request, and note that the latter request was considered and refused in 2017.
The council's report states that there are no impacts to health and well-being. Given the loss of informal recreational green space and nearby special needs groups, we disagree with this and ask the committee to explain the assessment in this report.
Thank you. The fact that the council is seeking a development partner does not have an impact on health and well-being. Any potential impacts will be considered at the time of a at the time a final proposal is prepared. Thank you.
Can the committee please confirm the designation of the land known as Cowfield and what restrictions it places on the type of development that may be undertaken?
Thank you. The land is designated in the Unitary Development Plan as protected open space. This does not place any restrictions on the type of development which may be undertaken. Instead, it means that specific policies relating to open space contained in the Council's adopted core strategy and the Government's National Planning Policy Framework must be considered when the planning application is determined. These are Policy R3 of the adopted core strategy and paragraph 97 of the NPPF.
Thank you. Is the council aware of ongoing problems with parking and obstructions in Stokoe Avenue, resulting in the loss of the already reduced bus service and the additional pressure a new development would add to the situation?
Thank you. Yes, we are. These issues will be considered and addressed as part of the usual planning process, should the scheme proceed to that stage.
Is the council aware of a Japanese knotweed infestation in the allotment gardens that has not been completely eradicated despite treatment?
Thank you. Yes, we are. The council is aware of the infestation and its eradication will have to be considered as part of the future proposals for the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. Thank you, Ms. Potts. Just to briefly say that I think what is coming through there is that we are at a very early stage. We will make sure that we keep in touch with you moving forward with this and any proposals that do come through. Thanks for your questions. Okay, item 3 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, Councillor?
Stock College, Governor.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Councillor Lamb? Could you use the microphone, please, John?
Of course. It's item 11, Chair, Development of Council Schemes, and I declare an interest as Chair of the THT Development Board.
Thank you. Assuming there are no other declarations of interest, item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of December 2018. I wasn't actually here, but I am proposing that they are accepted. Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Everybody happy? Thank you. Item 5 is matters from council or overview and scrutiny committees, which I presume leads us directly into item 5A, which is the scrutiny review of the draft budget proposals for 2019-20. Councillor Acton, please.
Can I just mention beforehand that last week we had a report that the AMI review that went to the task and finish group, and we agreed a draft report along with a set of recommendations, and the report and recommendations will now go to the main scrutiny committee on the 12th of February for them to actually agree it then or otherwise. When agreed or otherwise, it will be forwarded to the executive for them to consider. We're also in the process of setting up a task and finish group in line with the agreed motion at the last council meeting regarding the reduction of the Trafford carbon reduction. In terms of the budget, we have set out a report that after having 2 meetings, and that report should be with the executive now. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Acton. Could you just knock your microphone off if that's okay, please? I know we're all getting used to this. Just very briefly to thank you for the report, and if you could convey our thanks as an executive to all scrutiny members across the 3 committees that participated in that. I appreciate that it's always a considerable amount of work for the committee, and I will make sure that we respond fully to the report in due course. Item 6 is the... Sorry, Councillor Anstey.
Thank you very much. Just one question on that scrutiny report. The report references that the scrutiny committee has seen full and balanced budget proposals for 2019-20. That is different to the report that was presented to the executive when the proposals at the time still had a pretty significant gap between what was required and what was needed. I just wondered whether that documentation and the information that sort of leads scrutiny to make that comment could be made available to all members.
Councillor Cordingley.
Website, but yes, they can have the slides.
Everything where we are with the forward plan will be brought up today, and we'll respond as in good time, and we'll try and include that in the response.
We will make sure that you receive the slides that went to scrutiny, which of course your scrutiny members will have seen. Councillor Coggins, did you indicate that you had a question, please?
Thanks, yes, and I wanted to second the thanks to scrutiny for all the work that's gone into this. It was about the, on page 9 or 5, whichever way you read it, about the climate emergency budget. So this was passed with all-party agreement in November, and I know it's been to scrutiny already. And I think there was an appreciation of how high the stakes are and that we're working on the IPCC's 12-year deadline. However, now at the end of January, we still haven't set up the task and finish group. It does have the word emergency in it. I'm just wondering how the timescale is going with this, and if this is an appropriate response to an emergency. Thanks.
Well, we first and foremost, before Christmas, we met the chair, myself, and the vice chair with Richard Rowe to outline what we were planning to do in terms of that scrutiny role. We also need some funding, because that was within the recommendations from the council, that needed funding to enable us to fund some specialist advice. And we're waiting now on the budget to be set, and whether that funding will be given before we can actually move forward.
Could you knock the mic off, Councillor Acton, please?
Yes.
Geraldine, did you want to come back?
Just very briefly, I wouldn't have thought the funding was necessary to initiate the task and finish group. It could get its personnel set up. It could have some preliminary meetings and so on. Thanks.
We've asked for that to happen because obviously GM are doing a lot of work in relation to reducing carbon footprint right across Greater Manchester, and I've asked Richard to ask GM if we can have an officer that could come along to our meetings.
Thank you. Just to add to that, Councillor Coggins, I will make sure that we respond to this report in good time, and that will be addressed, as it's one of the recommendations, will be addressed swiftly. Okay, just to move the recommendations within that report, that the exec receive, note and respond to the report and its recommendations. All in favour? Thank you. Item 6 is the adult social care charging and debt recovery policies and regulatory reform order, disability facilities grants, proposed changes following consultation. Councillor Harding, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm pleased to bring this report back to executive following September's executive, when we initially put forward the consultation. I think one of the things that has shown us is just how complicated and complex adult social care charging is, as was referenced at the meeting in September by several members. So I think it's really shown us just how complex and complicated it is, but actually we've taken some quite significant learning from doing this consultation, really. So just in response to the recommendations, we will look to merge the social care and debt recovery. We will look to make communication much smarter and sharper for members of the public, so they're clear exactly what the charging processes are and debt recovery. We absolutely need to get some clearer guidance for the disability-related expenditure, and I myself have been doing some research today, looking at some of the London authorities about some of the public guidance that is issued. I'll be discussing that with Diane and the team, but it's clear that we need to do some more work around that. But that recommendation is broadly supported too by the public. The recommendation about introducing of the charges, initial and annual, for loans and deferred payments. We still have some work to do, and the initial charge will still go ahead, but I am pleased to say that we have listened to members of the public who were absolutely against an annual charge for the deferred payment and loans. So happy to report that we won't be progressing with that. Same with the clear guidance for third-party top-ups. We still have some work to do and some market testing about what the best model is for third-party top-ups. And with that, I'm happy to move the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Harding. Are there any questions from members of the executive? Any questions more widely? Councillor Stephen Anstey.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Harding, for the report. Just 2 comments, really, more than questions. I know the last time this came to exec, there was a raft of questions that came. I am very pleased to see that one of the main concerns that we held was around the ongoing charging, and it is very pleasing to see that that has been removed, and notwithstanding the comments that you've just said as well. So thank you for that, Councillor Harding. And the second observation I would just make on this report is that where a charge is applied, that we continue to take the utmost care to ensure that the most vulnerable people we have in our society are fully aware of their legal obligations where we are taking a charge. And with that, I will finish my comments. Thank you.
Just to affirm, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anstey, Councillor Harding. The recommendations are at page 13 of the report. Are those agreed? Thank you. Item 7 is the Section 75 Better Care Fund and Improved Better Care Fund Agreement 2018-19 between Trafford CCG and Trafford Council. Councillor Harding again, please.
Thank you. This report is for noting. There's quite a detailed report behind this. Just to be clear, this is a retrospective sign-off of a Section 75 agreement between the Council and the CCG in relation to the Better Care Fund. This report was prepared by the Commissioning Directorate, and there is no risk share in relation to this report, so it is purely for noting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. Fairly straightforward. Are there any questions from members of the executive? Any questions more widely? No. Okay. The recommendations are as at page 29 of the pack. Are those agreed? Thank you. Item 8 is the business rates discretionary rate relief policy, amendments to reflect the autumn budget. Councillor Cordingley, please.
Thanks, Leader. The actual report details the changes that were announced by the government. We basically are implementing the government advice, and that is therefore proposing to amend existing business rate discretionary rate relief policy to include new measures which will support retailers with a rateable value below 51,000 as well. And I certainly know of one person who might be interested in this. It extends that relief to local newspapers office space in 1920. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Any questions from members of the executive? Any questions more widely? Councillor Laura Evans, please. Laura, could you come forward and use the mic if possible? Thank you.
Obviously, I'm delighted with this, putting this forward. What I wanted to know was, and I know we're putting it in as a, or hopefully going to put it in at source, and you said that you're going to, I think we're looking at a CRM package that will be able to deliver that. Is that correct? Am I right with that?
Nikki Bishop.
Yes, so we just need a software adjustment, as we do every time they roll out some new legislation. We just need to wait for our software provider to provide the update, and then we can rerun the bills for those affected businesses.
And is it still, that was the point I was wondering about, rerun the bills, because for example, small post offices will benefit from this. Pubs will benefit. Not that I'm a great pub goer, but I'm not averse. So I wondered if perhaps they might be written to notify them that they will be getting, because if it takes 6 months, it's a long time to wait, and it's all about the small business feeling the relief from having this implemented. So just a thought, it depends. If you can get it done in a week, great, good luck. But if it's going to take longer than that, then it's a piece of good news, and I think they'll welcome it. That's all. Thank you.
We'll look at the practicality of that. However, actually running the software helps us to identify who the people are, because you can imagine there are thousands of hereditaments on the Trafford Council system. So working through them manually would not be an easy task, I don't think, but I'll take that back.
Are there any further questions from members? No. Okay. The recommendation is as set out on page 1 of the report. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 9 is the determination of the 2020 admission arrangements for community and voluntary controlled schools and the approval of the associated documents. Councillor Ball, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very detailed report. It's basically about us determining the 2020 admission arrangements for our community and voluntary controlled schools by the 28th of February 2019. We're looking at 2 changes here. The first one is around the LEA, and we are making current arrangements, changing them, to propose to combine the Templemore, Moorlands and Worthington catchment area, and also under B, Lostock College. For the 2020 admission round, we are proposing to include priority for children who were previously in state care outside of England and have ceased to be in state care as a result of being adopted. Most of the detail is in the report, but I will just highlight that in relation to previously looked after children, the DfE have now issued new guidance on this admission, basically saying we believe such children are also vulnerable and may have experienced abuse and neglect prior to being adopted. We believe it is right that we put these children on an equal footing for the purposes of admissions into school to those children who are looked after and previously looked after by a local authority in England, and that makes absolute sense. In relation to combining Templemore, Moorlands and the Worthington catchment areas, oversubscription in the Sale East area continues to be an issue for families living in the area at the normal point of entry, and for those families moving into the area with children already of school age. In the 2018 admission round, every reception class place in the Sale East area was allocated, and both Templemore and Worthington have waiting lists for admissions to their reception classes. At the end of 2017, the foundation and key stage 1 classes in every school in the Sale East area were full, and 5 classes contained more than 30 pupils under the allowed exceptions to the infant class size regulations. So therefore, we proposed to combine the Templemore, Moorlands, Worthington catchment areas. Combining these catchment areas is very important, because if we need to expand a school in that Sale East area. So we're reserving the placements in this catchment area is a safety net actually for our Trafford catchment. It's also about securing places for our families in Trafford. So I would like to remove this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Are there any questions on that from members of the executive? Any questions more widely? Councillor Wetton, please.
Not a question really, just a comment. As Councillor Ball said, a lot of detail in the report, so very useful in that respect, and certainly broadly supportive of what is being aimed at here. It's worth implementing these changes. It is a scenario with many dynamics within it, many variables, and so there is possibility of unintended consequences, and I think it is incumbent upon us all to be aware of that and to be monitoring for those possibilities, and if they do arise, to look at what remedies would be needed there. The point that Councillor Ball made about previously looked after children and the fact that they are now being formally considered vulnerable. Clearly they are vulnerable. Their early life experiences in a lot of cases will have formed how they are developing as they get older and as they go into early adulthood, and they do need that extra consideration. So anything that does help those people along that path is certainly very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Councillor Ball, would you like to respond to that?
Just to say that I'm very pleased that you are supporting these proposals, and obviously we will be monitoring the situation in relation to our school numbers constantly. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No. Okay. The recommendations are as per page 2 of the report. Are they agreed? Thank you. Item 10 is the Highways Capital Programme 2018-19, update on the programme progress and additional proposals for investment. Councillor Adshead, please.
Thank you, Leader. It gives me a great pleasure to bring this report here tonight. The first of many reports over the coming years, setting out our priorities and aspirations in terms of highways and related issues. Obviously, reading through the report, you see there's a good spread of schemes across the different types of highways works. In addition to that, also a good geographic spread of those schemes around the borough, which is something I'm very proud of. Just to take you through the report, please. So I'm still recovering from a chest infection from last week. I'm not infectious anymore, but obviously it's, I promise you on that. It's just meant I did lose my voice last week. Just to comment, if you go into the background, 1.1, just show members that all proposals and priorities within this report are compliant with the higher proposal as set out in 1.2, as previously agreed by the council. And indeed, following to 1.3 and 1.4, you'll see obviously the contingency fund, which was obviously approved last year, but was actually set out originally at 874, which is later reduced from some urgent schemes which you are asked to approve during the summer, and that left some around 560. However, during the course of the year, it's been proved quiet that we actually didn't really need this contingency, and as a result of this, a number of schemes have been brought forward, some of which had been dire need, not paid in previous programmes, are set out in the appendixes at the back of the report. So I'm very pleased to actually approve this tonight. If you go through section 2, that sets out the areas of services that are covered, which I won't go through in detail there. But obviously, but one thing that's obviously is a priority for us will be making sure that all funding related into 2.10 on the pothole fund will be something I'll be keeping a very close eye on, given that we are now in winter period, and actually it's obviously the worst point in the year, and something I want to see us make the best use of those funds, which can benefit local roads and people, ensuring that we keep the borough moving in that sense. Just want to highlight 2 possible schemes in Appendix A, and that's Norris Road and Grange Road, something which have been outstanding for some time, and very pleased that we managed to get them in the programme, which they haven't been able to previously make in that sense of it. So with that, I'd simply like to move to the report, Leader, and actually say something I'm very proud of tonight, and obviously look forward to many similar proposals like this, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adshead, and we are, of course, all delighted to hear that you're no longer infectious. This is a really important report, actually, because it enables us to bring into scope some additional and much needed roadworks. Councillor Adshead highlighted Norris Road and Grange Road. This is not a political point, but in my view, these are roads that are long overdue and should have been addressed many, many years ago. So I'm really pleased that the first time that this administration is bringing forward a proposed list of roads to be addressed, that these 2 are included on there. Are there any questions on this from members of the executive? Councillor Freeman, please.
Yeah, just to echo, as the Selmore Ward Councillor, my thanks to the Norris Road being on the programme, but equally, I'd like to also mention again Grange Road. It's a road I walk down every day with my dog, and that is in desperate need of repair. So I'm really pleased it's on the programme. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I hope the dog has not been damaging the road. Okay, are there any questions more widely? Councillor Sean Anstey, please.
Thank you very much. Just, Leader, just briefly, I think to welcome this report. It is good to see that the additional funding that was made available in last year's budget is being reallocated in line with the contents of the report. And just on that point, I think it is worth, and I'm sure the executive will agree, that the council's highways client team and the One Trafford partnership with Amy are really motoring on roads and highways across the borough. And those two things, the report references the ability of the reallocation as a result of that partnership. And I think we should put our thanks on record to both the partnership and the Council's Highways client team at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anstey. I'm sure those comments are noted. Councillor Coggins?
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to welcome some of the spending. The Stoke Avenue Taylor Road situation has been very problematic. Something I highlighted a while ago. And there are other roads, Prestbury Avenue, for example, we highlighted over 4 years ago. I see it's still not on the list, and Oldfield Road in places. And it's very difficult for all road users, whether pedestrians, cyclists, or drivers. Secondly, about Woodfield Road, again, welcome the investment there. It's something, the dips is something that's a great concern to people who live there. I'm wondering what level of work this funding will allow there, and what the time scale on that is. And I've just a second question, I can throw it in now if you like. I see that some of this money has been freed up from underspends in tree work, and I'm just wondering why that money wasn't moved into other tree work. Again, given the commitments we've made in our climate emergency motion, trees are the cheapest way to meet some of those needs. If we could spend a little bit more on maintaining our trees, we would be saving elsewhere. Thank you.
Councillor Adshead, please.
Yes, obviously welcome from the comments there. I mean, obviously a lot of proposals have come in under budget this year, as you've seen, and that counts for all the budgets there. So there's certainly nothing being taken out of that in sense of it. You had one other point at the beginning which I missed out on. You said your first.
Just about the work on Woodfield Road, what level of work this will allow, and the timescale. Thanks. Yeah, obviously, as you'll be aware, obviously this is for this current financial year, so these schemes will hopefully all being well. They should be completed before the end of the financial year. If there's any delays, that will be notified of that. However, I think it is weather dependent at this time of year. So, but hopefully all being well, fingers crossed, and it is in the budget for this year. So if there's any carryover, then obviously that budget will say that it doesn't go back and the work will continue. It just means that it may be overlapping on that sense of it. But with that, obviously, when I've answered your other point, hopefully in that sense of it, and obviously that's a special fund you were talking about there in relation to the other item. But obviously that's coming, and there's nothing been taken out of the tree works at all. That's a separate type of fund. But it's quite obviously, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Could we just to clarify for you, Councillor Coggins, just on the particular point about timeframes? Clearly, we are quite late in the financial year, so there is an aspiration to deliver on that as soon as possible. I think what this will enable us to do is to crack on with the design work for these schemes. You know, I mean, some of them will be quite significant. Woodfield Road, in terms of the scope of works, you'll notice the most significant of the investments that we're making out of this money, reflecting the seriousness of the issue, but also the scale of the work. But I just wonder if Richard Rowe, our Corporate Director Place, wants to add anything?
Yeah, you covered most of what I said. The Woodfield Road is, as you know, is quite a complex issue. There's a lot of investigation being done to try and identify exactly what's causing the depression between both ourselves and United Utilities. So this funding has enabled us to do the full level of investigation that's going to be required, which is quite detailed. Hopefully, this will enable us to do the full repair work that's needed. But until we actually get down there, we won't know. But the intention will be that we start on site on that investigation as soon as we can.
Sorry, just to clarify, so for Woodfield, do you think this will cover the full investigation, and you hope it will cover the repair as well? Have I got that right?
It will certainly cover the full investigation. The extent to which it will cover the repair will depend on the outcome of the investigating work. But as the leader said, it's a significant sum of money that we're putting into this, so hopefully it should go somewhere to complete the repairs.
Councillor Wetton, I'm sure you're going to mention Grange Road.
But not straight away. Yes, thank you. Firstly, I mean, generally welcome this. It's a nuts and bolts report, and it's where the public can actually see lists of road names and work that's going to be done. So it's very welcome in that respect. Firstly, I wanted to mention the zebra crossing on Green Lane. I think it's probably the most infamous zebra crossing in the history of zebra crossings, that particular one. And it was a petition was got together, and public supported urging the council to get that work addressed. And it's we heard a little while ago that was approved, and it's good to see it included in this report. Certainly, Grange Road, very welcome. It's something that I personally have been working towards for a long time, and so I am pleased to see it confirmed in here. It is long overdue. The road has got a real reputation locally. It's just as well it's not a through road. And that's perhaps why it has taken so long to get it here. But it is very welcome to see it on this list. We just hope that the winter weather does not cause delays to all of these projects, because they will all be welcome in their own neighbourhoods. Thank you.
Okay, assuming there are no further questions, I will move the recommendations as at page 1 of the report. Are they agreed? Thank you. Item 11 is council development schemes, which we've already referred to this evening. Councillor Wright, please.
Thank you, Leader. This report asks the Executive to approve the next steps for 3 potential development sites, that of the Jubilee Centre in Bowden, Stokoe Avenue in Altrincham, and the Grafton Centre in Altrincham. We ask that the Executive approves the plans laid out in the report to produce a development brief for each of the proposals that will invite potential development partners for the sites. The potential use for these sites is, of course, open for discussion. However, all 3 offer the chance of regeneration and a potential capital receipt for the council. Consultation will, of course, be undertaken with all affected members of the community in relation to all of the development sites. The report also sets out the case for a creation of a development team. Establishing a development team will reduce the overhead cost of development by reducing the use of external development management resources. Being in-house, it will also give the council more capacity to further accelerate development on council sites. I move this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Are there any questions from members of the Executive? Any questions from councillors more widely? Councillor Barclay, please.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you too to Councillor Wright for the report. I mean, all 3 sites are really sensitive sites, and as demonstrated by the questions that we heard at the start of the meeting, they're deeply cherished by the residents who live close by. I'm really, really pleased to hear that you're going to be engaging closely with local residents, and I would also ask if you could make sure that ward councillors are also involved in that process, because it's really important that we get the sites just right for everybody involved. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to facilitate that. Not a problem. Thank you.
And just for some reassurance, Councillor Barclay, I did raise that specifically with the team today as being very important in relation to all 3 of these sites. Councillor Lamb, had you indicated?
I did, yeah. Thank you very much, Leader. And it was just on the development team, and particularly paragraph 3.2, which sets out the costs of the team, which is no small sum at all when we're talking about £500,000 worth of management cost, and of course that is just in 1 year. If we take these schemes that have been mentioned here, if they've got a 2 or 3 year life, you're talking about £1 million, £1.5 million pounds worth of salaries here. And I wonder whether the executive member could just help me maybe with some clarification, because these are big costs. The wording actually talks about, the size of the team is based on delivery of 3 additional schemes. I wasn't sure whether that was referring to the 3 schemes that are mentioned in the report, or whether there's another 3 schemes. So we're talking about 6 schemes, because if it's about the 3 schemes mentioned, it just seems to me that we're very salary heavy here for what is, 3 relatively small schemes. Thank you very much.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's just those 3 schemes. I'm more than happy to go over to Richard for a bit more detail on the financials.
The starting point is for these 3 schemes, but as the exec member will know, A year ago, the executive approved a land review programme of council sites for disposal over the next few years. So this is the start of the potential for the direct development of council-owned sites. So we'd expect this team to take forward. The costs are significant, yes, but they will be covered by the income that's received from developing those sites. If we develop it ourselves, the council are able to take a greater return from that than us selling the sites, and it's more cost effective than us paying an external development manager to bring forward those sites. So that's on the basis that we believe establishing our own in-house team gives us greater control and gives us over the product and gives us greater control of the financial return that comes from development.
May I, Leader? Thank you. Yes, and I can understand the issue about in-house, out-of-house resources, but nevertheless, we are talking about £500,000 a year worth of salaries here for 3 schemes, which strikes me as being very salary heavy, I have to say.
I think basically, Councillor Lamb, the fact that it can be capitalised gives us some reassurance. I appreciate the point that you're making, that there may be some potential savings there. That's certainly something that we can keep open for review. But I think the flexibility that having our own in-house team offers us is something that we consider extremely attractive, particularly given that it doesn't impact on the revenue budget of the authority. I think Councillor Coggins, had you indicated that you had a question, please?
Thank you. Briefly to follow up on some of the questions that the residents raised. So just to welcome the cooperative approach that you've indicated. On question 4, Councillor Rice said that we thought the alternatives were unlikely to bring the regeneration benefits or returns that these schemes will. I suppose some of us feel that there are other benefits, environmental, community benefits, health and wellbeing benefits, which are not being given sufficient weight in this consideration. Also, just wondering, are we bearing in mind exactly what went wrong the last time this scheme was proposed in 2014, and will we be ensuring that this scheme is sufficiently different? And finally, we're just still awaiting clarification.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Coggins, but just to advise Councillor Anstey that if I can hear the conversation probably being picked up on the microphone as well. Councillor Coggins, if you could.
It was just finally, we're still waiting clarification on the disposal list. Was it only the allotment gardens that were on the disposal list, or is the section of Cowfield also on it? Thanks.
I'm going to refer you to Richard for the final question, by all means. In relation to the other questions, we obviously will take into account everything that you've mentioned, and we are going to consult on all of these proposals. So any questions or comments or queries that you have on that can be done via the consultation route. We will be listening. Thank you.
Just on the final point, the site that's on the disposal list is the allotments plus an element of the Cowfield garden. That doesn't mean that's the whole site that ultimately gets developed out, but that's the red line at the moment.
Councillor Myers.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Just going back to Councillor Lamb's earlier point, on page 152, it gives the programme director has been listed with a salary of £100,000. Can we just confirm that will go to full council for approval?
We certainly can confirm that should we take that forward. Clearly at this stage, that's just an indicative salary to give an idea of what we think the market requires in terms of salary. Clearly, if we were to do that, there would be a significant amount more work required with this through the Corporate Director of People. At this stage, as indeed with all of the sites that are being looked at, this is a purely exploratory paper, but obviously if we were looking to recruit anybody on a salary of that significance, then it would require full council approval.
Just to confirm, all the salaries are indicative, so they haven't been through the full job evaluation process at the moment. So this is more about the principle of the council bringing development expertise in-house rather than outsourcing that into the private sector.
Any further questions from members? Okay, just to clarify then, as I said earlier, that this is, at this point, exploratory. We are committed to working with the communities and indeed the ward councillors impacted by this, but putting that to one side for a moment, the recommendations are as at page 1 of the report. All in favour? Thank you. Item 12 is the budget monitoring report for period 8, April to November 2018. Councillor Cordingley, please.
Thank you, Leader. The position at period 8, which is, as you say, is till November, has slightly improved since previous monitoring reports. The headline now is that we're anticipating that we're on budget for the end of the year. I think it's £20,000 underspend, which is neither here nor there. So I think it's worth treating it as on budget. Having said that, below the surface, there still remains considerable pressures on Trafford, and in fact all English councils are suffering the same thing, which is particularly pressure on children's services that is well documented weekly in The Guardian, and pretty much everywhere is suffering that. Similarly, we've also got pressures on adult social services, and the position is pretty much the same as it has been throughout the year. But by the end of the year, we're anticipating breaking even. On table 1, page 2, it gives the reports, and we're happy to take questions about individual developments. We're also planning on, if you turn to page 12, we're doing some work on reserves. We're creating 3 new reserves in this. The first one is a reserve because Manchester Airport have given us an increased dividend. We're 2 million more than expected, and we're putting that in a reserve to hold against future expectations where we may not get as much. We've also got a DSG reserve, which is essentially the high needs block, which is 600,000. Business growth reserve of 3.31 million, and those are new reserves that we're setting up on that. We're making some amendments to the capital programme, so we're reprogramming Sale Leisure Centre, which is on page 14 or page 174, depending on how you index the report. And that's been reprofiled because of the pressure on adult socials and adult leisure centres with the Urmston and George Carnell and Stratford, indeed. So the sale is being reprogrammed on there. And as I say, I'm happy to take any questions, but overall the news is a lot better than it was in previous months, but there's a lot of pressure under the surface, as I say.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Any questions or comments from members of the executive? Any questions more widely? Councillor Myers.
Yes, thank you, Leader. On page 2, Mike Cordingley's already referred to the overspend. If you total up the overspend in the various service departments, it's about £3 million, which is quite significant for period 8. And in talking just now, you strike me as rather complacent almost about the depth of the problem there. So I'd be very interested to get your views on that. If we turn specifically to the public health line, which shows a figure of £329,000, it's only £329,000 because you've ignored a specific saving of £371 million, which was originally highlighted in the report with no indication of where that's coming from. So I'd be grateful to know where that 371 is coming from. Paragraph 8 on page 12 refers to a table 2 in the report, but there is no table 2 in the report. So some clarification on the reserves that you mentioned would be very useful as well. On page 9, it talks about the Lobo loan, which I'm very glad has been resolved, because that could have been a nasty issue to carry forward. So I'm grateful to see you've managed to resolve that. and I'm sure the auditors are happy with that as well. On page 13, it mentions the loss of rateable value on demolished properties, but there's no quantification of how much we're talking about, so that would be useful as well. And then turning to page 26, which is the CCG area, there's an underachievement of £4.5 million in their plans, which my understanding is if that cannot be bridged in some way, will either need to be repaid, or it will have to be funded in some other way. So some clarification on that would be very helpful too. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. As always, I'm happy to take as many questions as members wish to ask, as long as time allows. I think if we've got that number of questions on a specific item, as I've said to Councillor Stephen Nancy in the past, it would be useful to have them in advance, but appreciate that given the specific information asked with some of those, we may need to come back to you in writing. But Councillor Cordingley, is there any comments that you'd like to make?
Well, one very simple one. Table 2 is on page 3 of the report. But in terms of complacency, I don't accept that. In fact, I think you probably wrote that question before I did my speech, because actually what I'm saying is that underneath this is not, I could have come in and said, wonderful, we're on budget. Actually, I didn't say that. I said there's a lot of problems underneath, which I don't think is complacent. I think actually, and the fact is that these problems have been experienced certainly by all English children's services and councils, and it is a national problem. I don't think I'm being complacent on that at all. I think politically, local government is being, quite frankly, being shafted by the government, and I think we're doing very well to come in on budget.
Are there any of the other questions that Councillor Myers asked that anybody wishes to address now? If not, then I will make sure that they're followed up in writing. Helpfully, we have a recording of it now to ensure that they are all picked up in due course. Councillor Myers, were you wanting to come back on that?
Yes, just very briefly. I didn't want to upset Councillor Cordingley in any way by saying he was complacent. But the fact is, we're facing a £3 million overspend, which is a serious issue for period 8. Thank you, Leader.
I think it's important to add context there, because that line alone could be misconstrued. The overall budget position is that we're showing an underspend of £28,000. You're referring specifically to the demand-led services in children's and adults in particular, which, as Councillor Cordingley has already said, face unprecedented funding pressures as a result of national government policy. I'd also remind you, Councillor Myers, that the budget over which you presided last year overspent by £2 million on adult social care. But by managing the budget as a whole, as we are doing here, to generate an overall underspend, you were able to bring that budget in under. Demand-led pressures are something that we are simply unable to mitigate for without knowing what we will be dealing with on a daily basis. What I would say is that there is no complacency here. We do understand the scale of the problem. We are still holding some £800,000 in contingency across children's services and adult social care, and we are doing our best in the face of what is nationally a crisis in children's services. So I wouldn't want anybody here this evening or watching at home to think that this administration is complacent. We recognise fully the pressures that are on our demand-led services and the cuts that have been made nationally to children's services and adult social care in this country. Frankly, it is a disgrace, but we will continue to do our best for residents. And if there are no further questions from members, Councillor Wetton, please.
I'll just make a comment, if I may, looking at table 1 and perhaps tying in with some of Councillor Myers' points. I think what I see that's slightly different here compared to the last few years of these reports is that the bulk of the headings are overspent, and there's a big surplus from place, which is making a big difference to it. in previous years, it was sort of half of the departments would be overspent, and particularly the demand-led ones, and others would be in surplus. So I just worry that there's some sort of trend developing here that could lead to a serious overspending situation arising in due course. I mean, we'll see how this year pans out, but I just sense a difference in the way the numbers are portrayed compared to previous years. Looking at what I'm got in front of me and how it is at this point in the year. I take on board what you say about, you know, the numbers that we don't yet have in front of us that you're privy to are better, but I sense a difference here, and I think probably you yourselves do too.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. Councillor Cordingley.
We've quickly pulled up this time last year, and that was showing a similar figure. I think the thing to remember is that adults and children's may only be 2 lines on the table, but they account for well over 50% of the spending. And I think actually that's where the focus has to be, on those 2 particular lines. Whether there's other lines that have small overpayment, in the great scheme of things, it's the adults and social service, the adults and children's that makes the big difference, and they were overspent this time last year as well.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Leader. You know, and in the big scheme of things, and not much to do with national government policy, there is, of course, the Transformation Fund. Now, it's in the CCG's report, but this is a fund which is managed by both this council and the CCG, and what we see there is a very significant underspend. And of course, whilst normally that would possibly be good news to some ears, in this case, it certainly is not, because we know from the report that if the benefits aren't being delivered, then the 2 big holes in the 2 budgets, which have already been alluded to, are not going to go away. And as far as I can see in the report, at 2.2, which is on page 185, it's explained away in less than 2 lines. The reason for the underspend are mainly as a result of delays in the implementation of some schemes whilst options or requirements are fully scoped. And that might be absolutely fine. I suppose my request will be, in addition to the questions that have already been asked, because I don't think we'll have all the detail now, is what is behind that? What's actually causing that delay? And there may be really good reasons, but I think it'd be really good to know, because that is a very serious underspend, which is going to have big impacts on us trying to close the budget going forward.
I don't disagree with that, Councillor Lamb. You will recall a recent executive meeting where we had sight of the shambles that was the spending of the 2017-18 Transformation Fund. And I think it may be that some of the programmes that were earmarked for progression in that year and yielding savings this year perhaps have not come fully onto stream. But I think Nikki will be able to give a more precise response.
So, as you quite rightly said, the report covers both the council and the CCG. Actually, most of the council schemes are on track and are spending against their budgets. There's only one, which is the home care, which is yet to be developed in detail, and that is being worked up at the moment. The CCG schemes, this same report was taken to the CCG's governing body, and the CCG schemes were examined at the governing body of the CCG as is appropriate. But I think it's fair to say that the CCG management team are working on those schemes.
I mean, just to support what Nikki said, really, in terms of these schemes, there was a delay, so some of them were delayed. There's quite a number of schemes which are quite service specific, so we're going through each scheme to look at what impact they might have. There was also one scheme which we actually did put a halt to, which was more about organisation than actually
development of services which would impact on individuals. So we've gone back to GM to look at brief profiling that work, to actually look at our neighbourhood place-based models around primary care and integration. So we're taking each scheme, we're working on that on a weekly basis and with our providers in the local care alliance, really. So it literally is line by line that we're going through in terms of the CCG Transformational Fund.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Nikki. Are there any further questions on this report? Okay, the recommendation is that the report is just for noting, but also to note the changes to the capital programme detailed in paragraph 21. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 13 is the AGMA Combined Authority Executive Board Forward Plans and Decisions. Just to receive and note those, are they noted? Thank you. I haven't been informed of any urgent business at item 14. Item 15, we come to the exclusion resolution, which I will read as we've got people present, which is that the public be excluded from this meeting during consideration of the remaining items on the agenda because of the likelihood of disclosure of exempt information which falls within one or more descriptive category or categories of the Local Government Act 1972, Schedule 12A, as amended by the Local Government Order 2006 and specified on the agenda item or report relating to each such item respectively. I move the resolution. Is that seconded? All in favour? Okay, if we could ask the press and public to